Let's first go across to Major Marcus Sheff, IDF spokesperson, joining us. Mr. Sheff, I thank you for your time. I do have to begin by asking you, the IDF has released what it says is evidence on how it was a misfire of the Islamic Jihad missile that actually landed in that Gaza hospital. And of course, we've run those images and even that audio clip. Do you want to add anything to it? What more has the IDF found? What more proof are you willing to present to prove that it was not an Israeli missile strike?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. In all honesty, I don't think any more proof is needed. All of the proof which anybody needs in order to see the reality, which is that Palestinian Islamic Jihad, an Iran-backed terrorist organization, fired a salvo of rockets at Israel. One of them misfired. It hit the car park of the hospital. The fuel that was in the rocket exploded with the terrible results that we saw. There is footage from more than one angle that we have all seen, which very clearly shows that. We have seen footage of the kind of crater that their rockets leave, not the kind of crater that a JDAM, that a missile coming from an aircraft creates. There is really absolutely no need for any more evidence. Absolutely anybody who understands these issues is entirely convinced by what we've seen. But, let us understand the reality here. Thousands and thousands of rockets have been fired at Israeli citizens by the Hamas terrorist organization and by the Palestinian Islamic Jihad organization. Close to 7,000 at this point. Something like 450 misfired. It might be more. This is just one of them. And there are people on the other side of these rockets, Israeli civilians, who are being terrorized constantly by these rockets fired into civilian areas, into normal communities.
Right.
Hour after hour, day after day.
Can I ask you that while you may have presented this proof, are you convinced that some of your neighboring countries will accept that? Because we've seen that Mr. Biden's visit with some of these leaders in Jordan was cancelled. We've seen some uproar on the streets around embassies, both Israel and American. We're also seeing, greater calls being made against Israel because of the initial news that Israel was behind this attack. How do you plan to counter that?
Well, I think the first thing that you said, frankly, is the most important here. The initial report, which was hasty, inaccurate, entirely reliant on a terrorist organization. And this is, of course, the problem. News organizations are depending on the reliability of a terrorist organization, which is quite happy to murder civilians, to rape women, and to abduct young and old and drag them back to Gaza. An organization that will do that is an organization that has no compunction in lying to the media. So I think the media really needs to be far more careful before it comes out with statements taken entirely from Hamas, because there are real world consequences.
Okay.
I will say something else, though. As far as the leadership in the region is concerned, there are very smart leaders in the Middle East and beyond. They understand the evidence very, very well. They know exactly what happened. I am convinced that they are convinced, and it is just utterly sad to me that there are people in the region who were misled by the media and who committed really some extremely problematic acts. Burning down a synagogue in Tunisia. These are the real life consequences that I'm talking about.
Very quickly, can I ask you, there is a growing expectation of a ground offensive. Could you share more on that, even as some of the world leaders continue to visit Israel?
Well, let me just say that what is necessary is to uproot once and for all the Hamas terror network, its leadership, its infrastructure, its weaponry, absolutely everything that they use in order to wage the terror war which they wage and have waged unremittingly since 2007. You know, Israel withdrew from Gaza in August 2005 with hopes for peace. Hamas took over Gaza in 2007 and has directed all of its energies, all of its efforts at terrorizing Israelis, not feeding its population, educating its population, not building roads. They took water pipes to make bombs from it. Everything that Hamas has done has been terribly negative for the whole region. And I think the IDF knows that now it has absolutely nothing else that it needs to do except make sure that this stops.
I understand that, but people believe that it may not be entirely possible to wipe out Hamas, given that many of its leadership is actually not even in Gaza. And secondly, it could come at a huge civilian collateral. How do you address those issues?
Well, I think in answer to your second point, I think there are civilians involved who absolutely are needing to move. You know, there are tens of thousands of Israelis who have had to leave their homes, children having to leave their schools, families being uprooted extremely quickly because of Hamas terror. I think civilians in Gaza are being instructed to move south to safer areas. It's Hamas who is stopping them. Do you see the pattern here? Hamas using civilians time and time again as people who they hide behind, as people who are tools in the wars that they fight against Israel. The IDF is committed to targeting these Hamas terrorists. It might take time, it might not be easy, but the focus, and it will be backed by intelligence, is Hamas, not civilians.
And you believe that you can actually achieve that goal, that stated objective of dismantling Hamas completely?
I think it will take a great deal of time. I think it will be very delicate, but I think the IDF is absolutely committed to rooting them out once and for all, because I really don't know of any alternative. I do not have a vision of what life in this region looks like with Hamas still governing Gaza.
All right. Major Marcus Sheff, I do thank you for your time. Thanks a lot for speaking to CNN News 18. Let's also go across to more guests joining us. Sreemoy Talukdar is columnist, writes for the Firstpost. Sreemoy, you know, it's been 13, 14 days now since this attack took place. And, you know, we've been moving from one sort of reaction to another. But overall, we're also seeing very staunch opposition of Israel in what it says is just its basic right to defend itself. You know, earlier today, we saw visuals of how even Jewish organizations, pacifists, stormed into the US Capitol and basically put the onus on Israel to either commit to a ceasefire or take care of civilian population even in Gaza. How do you see that equation? Why do you think predominantly the blame is falling on Israel, where nobody is even asking Hamas to release the hostages that it still till today has it's in custody?
Shivani, thanks for having me on the show. I think that this was inevitable. If you look at the past instances when such violence took place, Israel is probably in a position where there are no good options for the country. The Israeli leadership understands that it has only a plate of bad choices. It doesn't have any good choice. So the only choice left for it to adopt would be the least bad option. If we go by how Israel has reacted in the past to these situations, one Israeli major who was abducted by the Hamas terrorists was exchanged in favor of 1,000 Palestinian prisoners not so long back. So when Hamas was kidnapping Israeli citizens along with citizens from other foreign countries, it was well aware that it was gaining crucial leverage over Israel, the leverage that it can put to use when Israel will obviously hit back. That is number one. Number two is that obviously there is another party here, along with the war that Israel must wage against Hamas. There is also an internal problem. There are two internal problems. One is obviously the political unity problem. Even though right now there seems to be a unity around the Israeli flag of sorts between a bitterly divided and polarized polity, that will not last. I've already seen interviews of people who do not identify with Benjamin Netanyahu's policies. They're already putting the blame on him, saying that he has brought us to this precipice. And these are Israeli citizens who have been at the receiving end. In fact, a couple of them whose parents and one of them whose relatives are abducted by Hamas. And they are blaming it on Netanyahu, saying that it is he who has brought us to this precipice. So that pressure is there. The third pressure will be from the hostage, the relatives of the hostages, who will obviously, put pressure on the government to put an end to this as soon as possible and bring back the hostages alive. So Israel's position is not at all good. It has a lot of bad choices to make, and the final thing is that Hamas has it all planned up, and when they had launched probably the vilest attack on Israel since Holocaust, it was well aware that Israel would hit back at them with all its might. That was baked into its calculations. So what were its strategy to thwart that possibility? It had basically two strategies. One I've already talked about, that is the hostage policy. It believes that since there is almost around 200 hostages in its custody, it will obviously be in a position to negotiate with Israel. That is one. And the second thing is that the Hamas leadership, as you have pointed out during your show, many of the top Hamas leadership are not even in the country, and some of them who are in the mid rank, they are secure in their fortified tunnels inside the Gaza city. This is a very sophisticated tunnel network. It runs quite a few miles down the ground, and it is quite fortified, and they are quite secure in their locations. What they have done is that by hitting at Israel, they have simply gone and vanished inside the tunnel, and they have put in the line of fire the Gazan civilians, who are now bearing the brunt of Israel's bombing campaign. This is a very well thought out strategy.
Yeah, but despite the fact that everybody seems to know how Hamas operates, there still seems to be some sort of a cover fire on an intellectual cover being provided against Hamas or for Hamas against Israeli action. Amy Tarkanian is former Nevada State GOP chairwoman, a Republican strategist, joining us. Amy, let me ask you about this, this protest at the US Capitol Hill, that a lot of the protesting members came in, and some compared it to the insurrection of January 6th. Why do you think there is such blatant and open support of even the terror attack that Hamas conducted? We saw many of those voices coming in from America, where people openly came out and said that this is fine, this is a freedom struggle, and they hailed Hamas, they hailed the paragliders. You've had public movements in US use that paraglider image as some sort of a movement image. Why do you think that's happening?
We're not exactly sure. It's extremely disturbing and quite perplexing, to be honest. I think the fact that we did see so many people at the rotunda yesterday, it's being reported that there were at least 300 people arrested. So that's good. Hopefully that will nip any more possible future protests in the bud, at least in that area. But we're not just seeing protests on the street. We're actually seeing universities, along with professors. There have been professors who have made some atrocious comments in support of Hamas, which is very concerning. And so I think right now what we're dealing with is a bunch of misinformation, unfortunately. So you have people who are, obviously grieving for the innocent lives that are being caught in between this situation with Hamas and the Israelis. So you have the innocent lives of the Palestinian people who are also being held hostage by the Hamas terrorists. And I think that's where you need to make sure that people understand that there is a not just a fine line, it's a definitive line between the innocent lives of the Palestinian people that are stuck there because of Hamas. It's not because of Israel. And then you have the Israelis on the other side who are also innocent, that have been abducted. So you're now looking at roughly, 4,200 people is what they're claiming that they know of that have died already because of this war that's going on. I think that we have a duty as people who are people who are, yourselves in the media, people who come on and speak about this atrocity, that we are either, hesitant to just react to everything that's showing up on social media because of all the propaganda that's going on as well. And so that's what's causing a lot of this consternation and a lot of anger, I believe, in these protests.
No, but Amy, were you surprised that we are living in a day and age where we thought, especially from the left of the political divide, there would be nothing but unequivocal condemnation of terror? But it is particularly from the left that we're witnessing not just false equivalences, but also very one-sided commentary on who is good and who is bad. Were you surprised? Were you shocked in any way?
Yes, actually, I am shocked, and I'm still shocked, because you also have members of Congress, such as Rashida Tlaib, who is going out and still spewing rhetoric that has already been found to be incorrect, but is not reprimanded in the process and will not retract her statements.
Yeah.
So this is extremely concerning when you have people who are in leadership positions that are stirring this pot of anger and misinformation. And quite honestly, now this is disinformation, because misinformation is by accident, correct?
Yeah.
Disinformation is intentional.
Absolutely, you're right about that. And actually, it's very surprising that exactly the set of people who claim that there should be action on misinformation and disinformation are often being caught spreading and continuing that disinformation. Sreemoy, I have a two-part question for you. Do you feel that some of this mainstreaming of anger against Israel in itself is based in incorrect history or reading of history, or one-sided reading of history? Because fundamentally, a lot of people feel that Israel is the quote-unquote occupier, and therefore Israel is to be blamed for anything that happens in this region. How do you look at that context?
Shivani, I think one important thing that, and I think as Indians, sitting across far across the place where this is happening, we were extremely puzzled as to why the people who are being butchered, and in this age of social media and GoPro cameras and body cams and dash cams, the terrorists were deliberately clicking pictures of the people they were butchering, live streaming it, and even as those live streamed pictures and videos were being displayed on social media, we had rallies out there in Western countries. We had people coming out with statements backing not the Israelis who were being butchered, but the terrorists who were butchering them.
So why is that?
We were puzzled. Yeah. So I do have an answer for you, and in fact, it directly correlates to the piece that I've written today. If you may, that I want to read out a relevant portion of that, because I think that this will bring out the actual result of why this is happening. So according to me, I think what is happening is that in this game of competitive victimhood, no matter how barbaric an assault the state of Israel suffers, this is a battle they will never be able to win. And conversely, regardless of the terrorism that it inflicts on the Jewish people, no matter how many babies they kill, the radicals of Hamas and its leaders will always be seen as punching up. Because, the dominant political ideology in America and in the Western countries is identity politics. And in the framework of identity politics, when one group has been established as oppressed, and the other group has been established as the oppressor, all atrocities committed by the oppressed group will be rationalized and explained as a political project which requires unmitigated backing by the intersectional left. So here you have the leftists, the Western academicians, who have spent their life in intersectionalism, who have spent their lives in this oppressor framework, who have spent their lives in fighting for the marginalized group. They have established that actually the people who were butchering people on the streets, the people who were butchering the civilians, the people who were killing the babies, raping women, they were in fact the marginalized people. So whatever they do is justified.
Is justified.
So
and we're seeing shades of that. We're seeing shades of that in India as well, unfortunately. And which is, I say unfortunate because we've been victims of very gruesome terror as well. So if anything, we should be not making excuses for terror or victimhood that spawns terror. But I have 30 seconds left, Sreemoy. You've also written in that piece, and I encourage our viewers to go to Firstpost and read it, that Israel has walked into a trap in waging a war against Hamas it cannot win. Could you maybe briefly, in 30 seconds, explain your premise, why you think this is a war Israel will not win?
Well, I mean it in both literal and rhetorical sense. Literal sense, because as the IDF general pointed out, it will be a very long, hard war, and it seems improbable that they will be able to get at the Hamas leadership. Maybe the lower rung members they'll be able to get, but that will also take a long time, and there will be such an amount of collateral damage that sooner or later the global voice of opinion will tip against them. It is already doing so.
Yes.
And West Asia is in turmoil. So Israel cannot afford to antagonize the entire world against them and carry out this. That is number one. And number two is that they are losing the high moral ground, regardless of the fact that they were at the receiving end when they are doing out their retribution in day after day, and when innocent civilians are seen to be suffering because of that.
Okay.
Then obviously they're losing the high moral ground.
Can
So
I just
that
add
in
one
both
thing?
ways,
I'm
I
not
think-
by any stretch an expert on this, but from what I've seen, Israel never had the higher moral ground. It has always been, as we discussed, quote unquote, the occupier and the oppressor, and they've never really played for sympathy. So for Israel, it hasn't really mattered how much sympathy it has. It doesn't use that sympathy card. We'll wait and see how this goes. I do thank our guests for joining us for that conversation. With that, it's a wrap from me. Rahul Shivshankar is joining you on the other side.